Time passes, people move. Like a river's flow, you can change your mind about a movie that gave a bad first impression following 7 months of reflection. Hi friends, I'm Sarah Jo Strawberry. Welcome back or welcome in. Today, we are going to be taking a second look at Cinderella 3, A Twist in Time, the 2007 Disney threequel to the 1950 classic Cinderella. My first video discussing my knee-jerk reaction after one viewing of this movie is to date one of my most viewed videos. Going in, I was aware that people loved this movie, but I was not aware of the extent to which this movie is beloved. However, I realized that with how quickly that video gained traction and people's reaction to it, and a lot of people were surprised and disappointed that I apparently came off as hating that movie, which was not the case, and I thought I made that clear in that video, but I obviously did not do a good job of that. The problem I had with that movie was that one moment at the very beginning left me very confused throughout the whole movie and just tainted the overall viewing experience for me. While I do think that my critiques and my confusion were valid, I have since realized that this movie is deserving of a second look. There's a lot that I'll be saying here that will essentially be repeating what I said in that first video, but where in that one I thought I was giving a nuanced take, it was obviously a bit more black and white and just came across as I was like, nope, I don't like this. So in this one, I want to more consciously try to be nuanced about my opinions on Cinderella 3. And if you've already seen that video, I do hope you'll stick with me here, even though I said it'll be repeating some things, or if you haven't seen that video yet, I hope you'll go give that a watch before you see this one, because there will be a shift in how I talk about those same topics I'll be bringing up here. Now, in the comments of that video, I did at one point say that I thought that the reason Disney made this movie was as a cash grab, and I think that came from just still being a bit heated after that first watch of the movie, even though, and this will come up a bit later, I did end up watching it a second time in the process of editing that video and getting clips for it, and that was when things started to shift for me, but, you know, I was still a bit, like I said, a bit heated, a bit steamed, that I had a bad viewing experience because it was a good movie, and I wished I could have enjoyed it more, but again, we'll talk about that more in a second. So, right. Called it a cash grab, and I also think that just came from my bitterness that I do feel that a lot of, especially nowadays, what Disney makes is a cash grab, and I'm thinking about making a whole other video about this, because this is something that really bothers me, and that I think about probably more than I should. Anyway, I also would have said that most Disney sequels of that era, from like the late 90s to the late 2000s, were cash grabs. A lot of them were, you know, just making a follow-up for the sake of making follow-ups, because some were successful, and a lot were made to be introductions to TV shows where they would take like the first 3 episodes of a show and just slap them into a framework to make it a movie and create a larger narrative. Usually not successfully, looking at you, Tarzan and Jane. Some of those direct-to-DVD sequels were genuine attempts to continue these beloved stories and to correct mistakes of the original movies. I think one good example of that is Pocahontas, where, look, they didn't do her actual story, the story of Matoaka, any justice. That is just a difficult story to tell truthfully and make good for kids, but they still tried to bring in a bit more historical accuracy, a very small bit, in Pocahontas too, and I do like that movie. But also there are a lot of good direct-to-DVD sequels from that era. Aladdin and the King of Thieves, the Lion King sequels. I don't know about anyone else, but obviously everyone loves Lion King too. Like, hello, this, other than the weird, like, incest thing, yeah, I mean, that just carries over from the Lion King, but let's all agree to not talk about that. But I mean, I adore Lion King 1.5. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I watched that movie so much as a kid. The Little Mermaid 2, Return to the Sea, Return to Neverland, I brought that up in my other video. That is, I think, one of the best Disney sequels. Now, looking at these Cinderella sequels, I would put Cinderella 2 into the cash grab category, and Cinderella 3 into the genuine attempt category. and not only do I think it was a genuine attempt, I think it was a successful attempt. Before I go over the errors in my thinking and my initial approach to watching Cinderella 3, I want to take a look at where exactly the movie lost me. A key to this is the way I watched it. I was marathoning all 3 Cinderella movies. I talk about this, it's something my husband and I do. Talk about it in my other video, where just once in a while we'll, I have a little jar with different Disney franchises, and we'll pull a name out and then watch that original movie, immediately followed by the sequels. So we had marathoned all 3 Cinderella movies, like 3.5 hours of movie watching. And so watching those one after the other, you're watching one, the last one is very fresh in your mind. So I'm going to go through, just quickly, kind of the plot of all 3 movies. We all know the story of Cinderella. A young woman is treated like an indentured servant by her stepfamily and dreams of a better life. When the opportunity arises to attend a ball and go enjoy herself for once, her plans are foiled by said stepfamily. Her fairy godmother appears to help her get to the ball. She goes to enjoy herself and ends up meeting and falling in love with the prince. Before they can get to know each other better, she has to hurry out of the ball, leaving behind one of her glass slippers. Eventually, she is identified through her glass slippers, and she and the prince live happily ever after. The framework of Cinderella 2: Dreams Come True is that the fairy godmother is reading the original Cinderella story to the mice, who are tired of hearing the same story and want to hear what happened after Happily Ever After. With the fairy godmother's encouragement, they make their own book recounting 3 stories from what happened after Cinderella officially became a princess. This also follows the formula of the taking a TV show or introducing a TV show with a movie and taking the first 3 episodes and, like I said, putting a framework around it. That's basically what I described here, right, with Cinderella 2. But I've looked into it, and I cannot find any evidence that they were planning to make a Cinderella TV show, so for whatever reason, this is the one movie where that wasn't their intention, but they still followed that formula. The first of the 3 stories takes place shortly after the end of the first Cinderella, with Cinderella and Prince Charming returning from their honeymoon. Cinderella is immediately thrown into princess training and learning about palace life, tasked with planning an annual ball. Cinderella butts heads with Prudence, the king's major domo, who wants to recreate the ball exactly as it has been, while Cinderella wants to breathe new life into it. In the end, Cinderella is able to host the ball her way, and everyone realizes that change is good. The second story is my, and I think most people's, least favorite of the 3, where we learn that at some point after the ball planned by Cinderella in the first story, she is trusted to plan another event, and Jacques wishes to be human so he can be more of a help to Cinderella. He learns that being a human, and in general someone he's not, isn't all it's cracked up to be, and learns to be happy with who he is. The third story is about Anastasia meeting and falling in love with a lowly baker. Anastasia thinks she's not good enough for him, while also having to deal with the expectations of her mother, Lady Tremaine, who thinks she and her daughters are too good for a common baker. Cinderella helps Anastasia boost her confidence and encourages her to defy her mother and fight for love. After some further hesitation, Anastasia stands up for herself and defends the baker against her mother. The 2 dance together at a ball and live, we can assume, happily ever after. With the first of the 3 stories taking place immediately after the events of the first Cinderella movie, it makes it seem like all 3 of these stories happen in rapid succession of each other, all taking place within that first year of Cinderella and Prince Charming's marriage. Cinderella 3: A Twist in Time begins with Cinderella and Prince Charming celebrating their first wedding anniversary. Anastasia, wishing to fall in love and live happily ever after, even though, according to the 3rd story of Cinderella 2, she had fallen in love with the baker months earlier, stumbles upon their anniversary celebration, put together by the fairy godmother and Cinderella's animal friends, and steals the fairy godmother's wand, which she brings back to Lady Tremaine, who uses it to turn back time to before the ball where Cinderella and Prince Charming met, and tries to get the prince to marry Anastasia instead. In the end, Cinderella and Prince Charming end up together anyway because no magic can overpower true love. You can check out my first video for a full summary of everything that happens, but the first scene of the movie is the key to why I was so confused by Cinderella 3. So like I said, I made that first video after having only watched it one time and for the first time, and going into that movie, the only thing I knew about it was that there was some sort of time-changing plot that initial trailer that came out that's just playing clips from the original movie played in reverse, and hearing Lady Tremaine's spell that she casts. That's all I've seen, that's all I knew of the movie before watching it. So there I was, coming immediately off of the story of Anastasia and the baker, going into Cinderella 3 expecting to see maybe a glimpse at the beginning of their life together, more of their happily ever after, other than what we saw of them dancing together at the end of Cinderella 2. Imagine my surprise when I see that Anastasia is still living with her mother, and there is no indication that she has ever met the baker. Not knowing what happens in Cinderella 3, I assumed that maybe part of Lady Tremaine turning back time was not just getting revenge on Cinderella, but also trying to break apart Anastasia and the baker and make her forget. Obviously, not what happens. But there I was, waiting for an explanation at some point of what happened with the baker and Anastasia, why we didn't see him at the beginning, why she's still hoping to fall in love, did something happen between them? Nothing. And because I spent the movie so confused, it really distracted from being able to appreciate the good parts of the movie. And I just kept coming back to that throughout the whole movie. And at the end, movie ends, credits roll, and we see a portrait of Anastasia and the baker. Okay, giving a calmer reaction to that than I did in my first video. A nice romantic portrait of Anastasia and the freaking baker! I threw a pillow. Because I was like, what the fuck? But that is the moment when my confusion turned to anger. It's why I called that first video Cinderella 3 Made Me Mad. Because that just felt like a slap in the face. Again, especially to my confused self, who's been wondering, where the hell is the baker? There he is, in a portrait. They get together anyway. Okay, cool. How does that happen? I liked their love story, so I was, it's one of the things that I think holds up about Cinderella 2, is that, Anastasia gets her moment to change and become better, and in turn, as a reward, fall in love. And it's kind of that falling in love that makes a change, but still, I think it's, I thought it was very lovely. So, a day or two after watching the movie, I make that video. Again, I'm still freshly upset about this, still confused, and in the process of editing, I ended up watching the movie a second time, and going into it, knowing what was going to happen, I was better able to appreciate it for what it was. But obviously, since that was during the editing, I didn't get to say that in that first video, and now, with 7 months of reflection and talking to people who watched that video and commented and told me their thoughts about it and why they think it's still a good movie, even though, it has confusing parts. And thank you to, those of you who commented and gave that feedback, because that was the goal of that video. Was I really wanted to like this movie from the jump. So I was also just disappointed that I didn't have a great first viewing experience, and I was hoping that people would respond and help me see, I guess, what I had missed and why I was the outlier in not fully appreciating Cinderella 3. So again, thank you to everyone who engaged in that conversation with me and helped me in this reflection. In turn, I have been able to reframe my approach to the movie and identify some of the places where my confusion was based in my own assumptions. My first mistake was in assuming that the stories of Cinderella 2 happen in rapid succession of each other and all take place within the first year of Cinderella and Prince Charming's marriage. The only one that is placed clearly within the timeline is the first story, where they are returning from their honeymoon. So it's entirely possible that the other two stories fall much later and after that first year, meaning it was after Cinderella and Prince Charming's first year of marriage that Anastasia met and fell in love with the baker. So it does, from that perspective, make sense that in Cinderella 3, or at the beginning of Cinderella 3, she had not yet met the baker. My second mistake, going back and looking at Disney's direct-to-DVD sequels, again, particularly of that time, and even today, a lot of the sequels they make, many of them are better classified as prequels or midquels, like earlier. let's talk about how much I love Lion King 1.5. That title makes it very clear that 1.5 is a midquel, right? So maybe it would have made more sense to me if Cinderella 3 was called Cinderella 2.5 or something, but either way, it is entirely possible that Cinderella 3 is actually a midquel to Cinderella 2, going back to that first point that, the stories don't exactly fall within that first year like I assumed. Third, I shouldn't be surprised that a Cinderella story is confusing. Not a Cinderella story, the Hilary Duff movie, just any given adaptation of Cinderella, especially if it is true to the original fairy tale, because how is it that, she has her clothes, her rags, and her regular shoes get turned into her magical ball gown and glass slippers, a pumpkin is turned into a carriage, her animal friends are turned into horses and a footman and a driver, and she has until midnight to, present these magical things as what they are, and then it's all going to revert back to what it was prior to the spell, and she runs away, loses a shoe, and magically, everything turns back, like the fairy godmother said, except for the shoes. Because it still would have worked if the shoes turned back to what they were before, right? Because the prince would be like, oh, I found this glass slipper, and then, in that moment, it's turning midnight, it magically turns into a regular shoe. Something is up, and then, Cinderella, of course, has the other glass slipper that also hasn't changed back, but if that one also did, then she could be like, hey, I have the pair, the mate to that other shoe, the soulmate, if you will. Haha, shoe joke. Anyway, and then on top of that, the way he tries to find her is by having every young, unwed woman in the kingdom try on this shoe, because apparently Cinderella has a magical, one-of-a-kind shoe size. That doesn't make sense. Either her feet are, extremely small to the point you can't stand, or her feet are incredibly large to the point that they would be able to identify her based off of that alone, because it's like, give us that episode of The Nanny where she has that dream that her feet are huge. She would have to look like that, and everyone would notice. Everyone notices Fran's giant feet in that episode, in that dream. I don't want to get into the whole, okay, so the prince's solution is to spread a foot fungus potentially around the kingdom, because who knows? I'm not saying Cinderella has a foot fungus, but who knows what these random chicks have going on with their toes. I don't think the Duke was cleaning out the shoe before every house he went to. Anyway, I also get that it wasn't really the prince's choice, because we say he couldn't be bothered to just go do it himself, and then he could identify her and just by her face and be like, that's her. Make it all a lot easier, but wasn't really his choice. And also, again, I don't blame Disney for this, because it's just the nature of the story. But Cinderella, from the beginning, from the original, is confusing. So why not make this threequel also confusing? Among the many things I like about this movie. 1, Cinderella gets more agency. Cinderella has always been one of the most strong-headed Disney princesses. Obviously, during the Disney Renaissance, they tried to introduce more of that, but in terms of the original princesses, Snow White, Cinderella, Aurora, Cinderella already had the most agency, and, look, I love Sleeping Beauty, I love Aurora, but I'm not gonna pretend she is anything like Cinderella is. This also, it maybe comes from the fact that if you look at the ages of different Disney princesses, she is among the oldest, so with that, I think also comes some more maturity, so it just lends itself to the character, and, she's one of the ones who, again, especially of those original 3, doesn't need a kiss to wake her up and, save her. She goes after her happily ever after herself, and so the prince kind of just sitting around and letting someone else take care of it kind of lends to the story and Cinderella being able to take charge of her own life. And we see more of this strong-headedness in the first story of Cinderella 2, where she's, fighting to fight tradition and to change things. In Cinderella 3, we get a similar fight from Cinderella in the first one to go after love, and she's an absolute badass in a way we've never seen from her before. She just really takes charge. She has a lot of action moments. It's just such a great expansion of the character and really playing on that established independence she has. Because even though all of this is for finding a man, it's still, she's all of these forces are trying to stop her from what she believes, she knows at her core is true love and what is her destiny, and she fights to make sure she has that. So I think she sets a great example. Number 2 is the animation. I talked about this a bit in the first video as well, and I just absolutely loved the look of this movie. It was so well made, and a lot of these sequels tend to look kind of cheap, and Cinderella 3 does not have that. It's one of the few that doesn't look cheap. And one thing I really loved was in the parts where they're reversing time, and you see moments from the first Cinderella movie, and then it's like they're going in reverse and being taken away, and it is seamless, and it's just I was so impressed. I was so mesmerized by how well executed that was. There was also the scene with the pumpkin carriage when Lucifer is driving it was so well done that even me at the big age of 32 was horrified by it. Again, I talk about how much that scene horrified me in my initial video. And going back, it's not as scary, but I really wasn't expecting that the first time. And I had a visceral reaction. I was scared. And as much as I was scared, I'm like, oh my god, I was really impressed by that they even went there. Number 3 is the music. As a kid, I love the music from Cinderella 2, and as an adult, I realize it's very cringe. And if you were to drop, say, A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes into Cinderella 2, it would not work. It would not mesh. It would totally stick out. But if you were to do that with Cinderella 3, it would work. It goes back to being more of a traditional animated musical, and they were just really well done songs. And this, I know I keep saying again, I talked about this in the other video, but I did, bring this up because I mentioned that, even my husband at one point, one of the first songs in the movie finished, and he turned to look at me and goes, oh, that's really good. I was not expecting that. I was like, and I'd been sitting there thinking that myself, wow, okay. So that happened before the moment of my confusion. So like I said, I was set and ready. I was enjoying myself. Number 4 is the voice cast, which it's basically the same exact cast as Cinderella 2, but I just want to give them their flowers because these are veteran voice actors, just iconic, and so it's always a joy to hear them. So it was just extra nice to hear them in Cinderella 3, getting to read some better lines. Among these, you have Jennifer Hale, who voices Cinderella, Tress MacNeille, Russie Taylor, Rob Paulson, Frank Welker, the original Alan Tudyk, Corey Burton, and Holland Taylor.
Holland Tunnel.
Holland Tunnel.
Bill Farmer is also credited as a voice in this movie, but doesn't specify, and I think it's because Disney likes to use the goofy scream in their movies, where other movies would use the Wilhelm scream. So I think that's why he's credited in there, but I don't know, maybe Bill Farmer's doing some other voices we don't know about. Number 5, the story. The story of the movie is really interesting and good. It's super original and gives Cinderella a fun new twist, and hence the name. But just the whole story is really great, and again, with the way it gives Cinderella so much more agency and so much more to do. And also, Lady Tremaine really gets to flex her evil in this one. She was still very nasty, in the first movie, but then in the second one is kind of defanged. She's barely there. So in this one, she comes back with a vengeance, because hell hath no fury like a wicked stepmother scorned. And finally, the 6th thing that I loved about this movie was they really scaled back on the use of the mice. And I love Jacques and Gus Gus and all their other mice friends, but I realized in that marathon, I was like, oh my gosh, the first Cinderella is mostly just the mice. A large portion of the movie is the mice, and then you get little bits of what's happening with Cinderella and Lady Tremaine and Prince Charming. And same thing, Cinderella 2. So much of the mice, it's all framed around the mice. So this one, and it kind of goes in hand with giving Cinderella more agency, where we get to see more of her being the badass she is and can be, because we're not being distracted by whatever nonsense is going on with the mice. It really is a good, well-made movie, but as I've been saying since that first video, the unclear timeline affected my first impression, and it would have been too much to try to over-explain in the movie where it falls in the timeline, so I get why they didn't do that. But there are some changes that could have been made that would have removed my confusion and made the movie really perfect for me from the jump. One is having Drizella be the one who basically is in Anastasia's place in the third movie. And this would give her an opportunity to also have this character arc where she changes for the better. It would erase that for Anastasia, because it would have to, if you did it where at the start it's just Drizella and Lady Tremaine living together, Drizella's like her slave alone, not Anastasia, then, again, like I said before, as part of Lady Tremaine's vengeance, kind of undoing them falling in love because she wasn't happy about it, and rewarding Drizella for not going against her wishes. And it would make it complicated to give Anastasia her moment of changing for the better, but they could have worked that in. And as a bonus, it would end with Lady Tremaine completely alone, which I think is the best punishment for her. The second idea would be to show at the beginning that Anastasia was in love with the baker, they had met, but Lady Tremaine still was keeping them apart, and instead of daydreaming about finding love, she was daydreaming about being able to act on that love and be with the baker. And then when Lady Tremaine turned back time, maybe she still steals the wand because she's desperate, Anastasia, and Lady Tremaine gets it, turns back time, and as part of that spell, she erases Anastasia's memory of the baker. And, the movie mostly happens like it does, but you could also add in an interesting element of, maybe the baker is making Anastasia and the prince's wedding cake and other pastries for the palace, so they run into each other, and there's this glimmer of recognition, kind of like what happens when Prince Charming encounters Cinderella after the spell's been cast. And then now it's this extra thing for Lady Tremaine to have to juggle, which would also make her story interesting, where she's trying to control, Anastasia and the prince and keeping Cinderella away, but now she also has to keep the baker away and has to keep pulling them apart, just as Anastasia's like, why are you so familiar? Redirect. And then at the end, again, it ends the way it does, but instead of just seeing a portrait, maybe it's like a double wedding, and Anastasia gets to marry the baker, and, Cinderella marries the prince. So I just think, that'd be fun. And then, because Lady Tremaine is always trying to maintain her cool, and she has moments where she blows up when things aren't going her way, but then it would be more of like that mask slipping and her being like, oh my gosh, I'm having to deal with all these people and try to keep everyone in line to get my way. Or maybe I should just shut up and accept the idea that it's probably a matter of Cinderella 3 being a midquel to Cinderella 2, and the timelines actually do make more sense than I first assumed. To make it abundantly clear, I don't hate this movie, and upon further reflection and a second viewing, I actually really do like it. And it was just that my first viewing was unfortunately tainted by my confusion, which led to anger, and I am really sorry to people who saw that video and took that personally and were disappointed by that opinion and my takes and critiques on the movie, because, as I said before, I did really underestimate how much people love this movie, and I totally get why someone would react like that to that opinion. Anyway, I'd love to know what you think about this video. Did you see my first one and not like my take there, but you can see better now where I'm coming from? Or did you watch that first video and agree with my take and are surprised that I've kind of walked it back a little and you still agree with my initial approach to it? Is there something I've still overlooked? I want to keep this conversation going because there's possibly more that I'm not seeing. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, comment, because I really do want to hear what you have to say. Subscribe if you want to see more like this, and, all that other fun YouTube stuff. Bell, hype, if that shows up as an option. I don't think it does, but if it does, yada yada. And with that, I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Just to quickly share a fun fact I learned while putting together some notes for this video, the original Cinderella premiered in February of 1950 in Boston, so, there's another little feather in my Massachusetts cap. One more time.